Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak about something that often goes unspoken, a kind of heartache that doesn't always leave visible scars, but wounds us deeply. The pain of loving someone who is emotionally distant. You see, one of the most painful things about loving someone who is emotionally distant is the loneliness it breeds. And I don't mean the kind of loneliness you feel when you're physically alone. No, this is something deeper. This is the kind of loneliness that sits beside someone on the couch, lays beside them at night, shares meals and conversations, and still feels like you're the only one in the room trying to make the relationship real. You pour out your heart not because you're dramatic or needy, but because you're made in the image of a face who communicates, who relates, who connects. You were created for intimacy, not just physical closeness, but emotional and spiritual nearness. That's not a weakness. That's part of being fully human. That's part of being made by a relational God. So when that connection is missing, when it's one-sided, it starts to hurt in places you didn't even know existed. You begin to long for eye contact that means something. You hunger for words that reassure, for presence that is more than physical proximity. But what you're given time and time again is cold silence, deflected conversations, or shallow answers that skim the surface and never dive deep enough to touch. And so you live in a house where your soul is starving while the world sees a normal, functioning relationship. That disconnect between what's shown and what's felt becomes a burden that wears you down day by day. Now here's where it gets worse. When someone you love refuses or is unable to be emotionally present, you start internalizing their absence. You tell yourself they'd be different if you were more lovable, if you didn't ask so much, if you weren't so emotional. You begin to apologize for simply having a heart. You begin to silence your need for connection so that you can preserve what little you have. And in doing that, you start to disappear, slowly, quietly. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not loud or dramatic. It's subtle. You stop bringing up things that matter to you because they never respond. You stop crying in front of them because they don't know what to do with your tears. You stop asking for reassurance because it only gets you frustration or indifference. And with every moment like that, you pull back a little further, not because you've stopped loving, but because it hurts too much to keep loving without being met. You can't bond with a shadow. You can't hold the hand of someone who keeps theirs in their pocket. You can't build a foundation with someone who's constantly absent in the moments that matter most. And that's what so many people live through. A quiet, invisible kind of grief that no one else understands unless they've been there too. And it's not just about romantic relations. This kind of pain shows up in families, in friendships, even in marriages that have lasted decades. The years don't make it easier. They often make the silence louder, because the longer you love without being loved in return with the same vulnerability and depth, the more hollow your own voice starts to sound in your own ears. And here's where I want to speak especially to those of you who've started to doubt your value because of this. I want to say something very clearly. Your longing for connection is not a flaw. It's not a defect. It's not emotional immaturity. It's a reflection of your design. You are not wrong for wanting someone to see you. You are not weak for needing someone to hear you. That desire is not something to be ashamed of. It's holy. When we open our hearts to love someone, we are offering them the most sacred part of ourselves. We are saying, "Here I am, all of me. Will you meet me here?" And when the answer to that question is indifference or distance or silence, it doesn't just sting, it wounds. Because love is meant to be communion, not isolation. A joining of hearts, not a constant game of hide and seek. I know there are people listening right now who have prayed late into the night asking why their love feels like it's hitting a wall. People who have begged the Lord to soften the heart of the one they love. People who have cried silently in bed so they wouldn't disturb the person lying next to them. The same person who feels like a stranger in the dark. And I want to tell you, your tears matter. Your pain matters. Seize it, even if they don't. But I also want to warn you, when you love someone who is emotionally distant, you can become so fixated on reaching them that you begin to abandon yourself. You begin to think that if you just try harder, if you're just more understanding, more forgiving, more patient, that maybe they'll finally turn around and love you back the way you need. And while patience and forgiveness are godly virtues, they were never meant to be used as tools to lose yourself in someone else's absence. Because here's the truth: love that constantly empties you without ever being refilled is not sustainable. It's not healthy, and it's not what God intended when He created love. God designed love to be mutual, edifying, sacrificial, from both sides. It's not love when one person constantly gives and the other constantly receives. That's imbalance. That's dysfunction. That's pain dressed up as commitment. Sometimes we confuse endurance with obedience. We think that staying in emotionally barren relationships is a sign of godliness, but staying in something that crushes your soul and steals your joy doesn't glorify. Walking in wisdom does. Walking in truth does. Knowing when to love from a distance because proximity is poisoning your spirit, that is not failure. That is wisdom. That is love rightly ordered. So if you're here and you're holding on to someone who remains emotionally unavailable, and you're asking yourself why it hurts so much, it's because your heart is not being met. Your soul is not being nourished. Your vulnerability is being answered with silence. And that is not how love is meant to feel. And I know you want to believe that they'll change. I know you keep seeing glimmers of hope. But sometimes the kindest thing you can do both for them and for yourself is to stop chasing the connection they won't offer and start healing from the ache of what never was. You can love them, you can pray for them, but you must also love the part of yourself that's been breaking under the weight of their absence. When you love someone who is emotionally distant, it's not just loneliness you face, it's exhaustion. And not just physical tiredness, but a deep soul-weary kind of exhaustion. It's the kind that creeps up slowly, the kind that builds every time you reach out with your heart and it feels like you're pulling from an empty well. You see, love is meant to be a two-way street, a sacred exchange where both hearts give and receive. But when one person is emotionally distant, that street becomes a one-way road, and you are the one walking it, carrying all the weight while the other remains still detached, unreachable. You give your love freely, not because you have nothing else to do, but because you truly want to love. You want to support, you want to understand, you want to be the person who walks through storms with them, who carries their burdens as if they were your own. But what happens when that love is met with silence, when your efforts to connect are ignored or brushed aside, when your patience stretches thin but the distance remains the same? It drains you. You begin to realize that you're not just loving someone, you're trying to hold together a relationship that's slowly falling apart under the strain of absence. You keep giving and giving and giving, hoping that maybe the next conversation, the next vulnerable moment will break through the wall, but it doesn't. And so every time you give, you have less left for yourself. Your emotional reserves, which once felt abundant, start to run dry. You may not even notice it at first because your heart is so focused on the other person that you ignore your own needs, your own pain. You push aside your own hurt, your own frustration, because you think it's less important, because you believe the relationship is worth it. And in many ways it is. Love often is, but there is a limit to what one soul can endure without rest, without reciprocity. You grow tired of being the only one who tries. You grow tired of making plans and dreams that only exist in your mind. You grow tired of the waiting for a phone call, a text, a sign that they care as much as you do. You grow tired of pretending everything is okay while inside you're breaking, and yet you keep going because that's what love feels like when it's unbalanced. It feels like sacrifice. It feels like suffering. It feels like carrying a burden that no one else sees, and that's why it hurts so deeply. You become emotionally exhausted, not because you love too much, but because you love without being loved back in the same way. You give your heart repeatedly, only to have it returned broken or ignored. You extend your hand, but it's never grasped fully. You offer your vulnerability, but it's met with avoidance. And here's the heartbreaking truth: when this happens, you may start to believe that this pain, this exhaustion, is your fault. You might think, if only I were more patient, if only I were more understanding, if only I weren't so demanding. But no, loving someone who is emotionally distant is painful, precisely because love is supposed to be mutual. It's not wrong to want love that is full and free, love that does not drain, but replenishes. In fact, God calls us to love, but He never calls us to lose ourselves. We are called to love others as ourselves. If we forget the as ourselves part, we lose balance, we lose health, and eventually we lose joy. I want you to hear this. Exhaustion from one-sided love is not a sign of weakness or failure. It's a sign that you have been brave enough to love with an open heart. It's a sign that you have been willing to invest in something deeply important. But it's also a sign that you need to pause and take stock, because no relationship, no matter how sacred, should leave you emotionally bankrupt. There comes a point when giving without receiving is no longer love, it's survival. And survival is not what God desires for His children. God wants fullness of life, wants joy, wants peace. And while love sometimes requires sacrifice, it never demands self-destruction. If you find yourself drained by a relationship with someone who cannot or will not meet you emotionally, remember this: your soul needs rest, your heart needs care, your spirit needs renewal.
And you have permission not to give up on love but to protect your own heart from being broken beyond repair. Sometimes that means setting boundaries. Sometimes that means saying no to the emotional labor that's only yours to carry. Sometimes that means walking away, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom and self-respect. Because love that drains you dry is not the love God calls us to. Love is life-giving. It renews, it restores, and He calls us to relationships that reflect that same love. So if you feel yourself growing weary, if your spirit feels crushed under the weight of loving someone who remains distant, know that you are not alone, and know that it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to ask for the love you need, even if it means you have to give less to the one who takes so much. You are worthy of love that fills you up, not empties you out. You are worthy of a love that nourishes your soul, and you are worthy of rest.
There's a subtle yet profound wound that takes hold when you love someone who is emotionally distant. It's the wound of self-doubt. It's the question that creeps in quietly at first and then grows louder with every unanswered call, every avoided conversation, every moment where your heart reaches out and feels nothing but cold distance in return. You begin to ask yourself things like, am I not enough? What is wrong with me? Why don't they love me the way I love them? These questions are not just fleeting thoughts. They become a chorus echoing inside your mind, drowning out the truth of who you really are. And it's dangerous because when we start to believe these lies that we are unworthy, that we are flawed, that we are somehow to blame for the emotional walls another person builds, we start to shrink. We begin to believe that the problem lies within us and that if only we could fix ourselves, change ourselves, be different somehow, then maybe, just maybe, we would be loved the way we long to be. But let me be clear about this. Your worth is not defined by the emotional availability of another person. Your value is not determined by how much love someone else is able to give. It never was. It never will be. You see, when you love someone who is emotionally distant, it's easy to fall into the trap of self-condemnation because we are wired for relationship. We were made to be seen, to be known, to be loved in a way that is whole and healing. And when that need is unmet, it feels like rejection. It feels like failure. And that kind of rejection hurts the deepest because it challenges your very identity. But here's what the gospel teaches us, and I want you to hear this deep in your heart. Your identity is not found in the approval of man, but in the love of God. God sees, God knows your heart, and His love for you is not distant or conditional. It is near, it is constant, it is unchanging. No matter how emotionally unavailable the person you love may be, you are fully known and fully loved by God. You are precious in His. Your worth is secure in Him, not in the shifting emotions of another. But I understand how difficult that is to hold on to when your soul is battered by doubt, when every unanswered text or avoided conversation feels like a verdict against your value, when the silence screams louder than words ever could. That's why it's so important to guard your heart, to protect yourself from believing the lies that emotional distance tries to whisper. You must remember that emotional distance in another is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a reflection of their brokenness, their fears, their struggles. It is not about you, and yet, even knowing that, it still hurts, because love is not meant to be a one-way mirror. It's meant to be a mutual reflection, a meeting of hearts that affirms and supports. When that mutuality is missing, the emotional gap leaves you vulnerable to the erosion of self-worth. You may find yourself withdrawing your own emotions, trying to protect yourself from further rejection. You may start to hide your true feelings, your true desires, because you fear they will be rejected again, and that cycle feeds the insecurity. But here is what you must not forget: calls you to a love that sets you free, not one that chains you to doubt and insecurity. He calls you to a love that restores your soul, not one that diminishes your value. When you begin to see yourself through size, the lies start to lose their power. The questions, am I enough, or why don't they love, begin to be answered not by the silence of others, but by the resounding truth of love. You are enough because says you are. You are worthy because God declares, and the love you seek, the love that feels so distant from the one you desire, that love is perfectly reflected in the love of God for you. So when doubt creeps in, hold fast to this truth. When insecurity threatens to drown your joy, remember that your worth is not up for debate. It's a settled matter in the heart of yes, and you must learn to love yourself with the same grace and compassion that shows you, because only then can you begin
begin to heal the wounds that emotional distance has left. Don't let the emotional coldness of another define who you are. You are more than their silence. You are more than their distance. You are a beloved child of precious and unconditionally love. And in that love you will find the strength to stand firm, to hold on to hope, and to walk forward with a heart that knows its true value, not because of what others give, but because of what God has already given. When you love someone who is emotionally distant, something subtle but very dangerous can begin to happen without you even realizing it. You start to change, not in the big obvious ways, but in the quiet corners of your heart and mind. You begin to shape yourself around their distance. You begin to adjust who you are, how you speak, what you say, and even how you feel, all in an effort to keep the fragile connection alive. It's not something you decide consciously. It's something that happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. You find yourself holding back your true thoughts and feelings because you fear pushing them further away. You start editing your words, filtering your emotions so that you don't make waves or cause discomfort. You become what you think they want rather than who you truly are. In this way, love becomes conditional. You begin to ask yourself, if I am quiet, maybe they will stay. If I don't ask too many questions, maybe they won't shut down. If I'm less emotional, less needy, maybe they'll love me more. And so you sacrifice parts of your authenticity, your vulnerability, your very soul, just to keep the relationship intact. Love is meant to be freeing, not confining. Love is meant to allow us to be fully ourselves, known and accepted. But when you start to mold yourself to fit someone else's emotional distance, what you're really doing is losing yourself. You are becoming a shadow of who God created you to be. And here is the tragedy. This self-sacrifice, though it may seem noble, is actually a slow form of death to your spirit. When you deny your true emotions, when you silence your own needs and desires just to avoid conflict or distance, you lose touch with the very essence of your humanity. You begin to perform love rather than live it. You learn to wear a mask of calm, of indifference, or even happiness, while inside your ache. You become an actor on a stage, playing the role of someone who doesn't need much, who is okay with little affection or connection, because that's what keeps the peace. But the peace is brittle, it's fragile, it's built on silence and sacrifice, not on truth and freedom. And over time, this performative love breeds resentment, because deep down you know you're not being honest. You know you're not being fully yourself. You know that you are giving up a vital part of your identity just to keep the relationship from falling apart. This leads to a dangerous place, a place where love is no longer joyful, no longer life-giving. Instead, it becomes a transaction. You give what you think is acceptable, and they give what they are willing to offer. You tiptoe around emotions, avoiding anything that might cause discomfort or distance, and the love that once held the promise of connection becomes a cold, calculated dance of survival. But this is not how designed love. Love is bold. It calls us to be vulnerable, to speak truth, to open our hearts fully. God calls us to love with courage, even when it is difficult, but that love is not meant to be lived in fear of rejection or abandonment. So when you find yourself bending over backward to keep someone emotionally distant close, when you find yourself hiding your true feelings to avoid conflict, you must stop and ask, am I loving way, or am I simply surviving this relationship? This question is not easy. It may lead to painful revelations, but it's necessary. Because when you sacrifice your authenticity for the sake of keeping someone close, you lose sight of the true beauty of love, the kind of love that brings freedom, not bondage, that heals, not wounds, that draws hearts together, not pushes them apart. And here's the truth, you deserve to be loved for who you are, not for the version of yourself that's been carefully edited to avoid causing trouble or discomfort. You deserve to be embraced in your full humanity, your joys, your fears, your doubts, your dreams, your flaws. You deserve love that doesn't require you to perform or pretend. When love becomes conditional or performative, it's not love anymore. It's a contract based on fear, not grace. And no one was ever meant to live under such conditions. Not you, not me, not. God calls us to a higher standard of love, one that is rooted in grace and truth, one that welcomes vulnerability as strength and authenticity as a gift, one that invites us to be fully seen and fully known and still fully loved. So if you find yourself living a life shaped by the emotional distance of someone you love, I urge you to consider what it is costing you. What parts of yourself have you hidden away? What dreams have you silenced? What truths have you left unspoken? Because love that demands you give up your true self is not love at all. It is a prison, and God did not call you to live in chains. He calls you to freedom. Freedom to be fully yourself. Freedom to love and be loved authentically. Freedom to walk in truth, even when it's hard. Remember this, your worth is not measured by how well you can adapt to someone else's emotional absence. Your value is not determined by how much you can sacrifice your identity to keep the peace. You are valuable because made you in His image. You are worthy because calls you His beloved. And you are free to live in love without hiding behind masks or pretending to be someone you are not. So stand firm, speak your truth, love with courage, and never forget that the love has for you calls you to live fully, freely, and when you love someone who is emotionally distant, you find yourself caught in a painful tension, a tension between hope and reality, between longing and acceptance. It's this delicate balance that wears on your soul and challenges the very core of what it means to love well. You hold on to hope because love, by its very nature, looks forward. It dreams of better days, of breakthroughs, of walls coming down and hearts opening wide. Hope whispers to you in the quiet moments, telling you that maybe, just maybe, this distance isn't permanent. That underneath the coldness and silence lies a heart waiting to be reached. And because you love deeply, you cling to that hope as though it were a lifeline. But alongside that hope sits the reality, a reality that can be harsh and unyielding. The reality that some people, despite our love and our prayers, remain distant. They carry burdens we cannot lift, fears they cannot share, wounds they cannot heal. Their walls are not just emotional defenses, they are sometimes barriers built by pain and brokenness, perhaps even beyond what we can fully understand or change. This reality forces you into a painful choice. Do you hold on or let go? Do you keep pressing forward in love, or do you step back to protect your own heart? This choice is never easy, because love itself complicates everything. Love asks us to endure, to be patient, to forgive, but love also calls us to wisdom, to discernment, and sometimes to painful boundaries. In this tension, many lose themselves. They become trapped in a cycle of hoping for change that never comes and clinging to a vision of love that remains out of reach. They sacrifice their peace, their joy, their very sense of well-being in the process. And yet, because love is so deeply entwined with our identity and purpose, letting go feels like a kind of death. It feels like failure. It feels like betrayal, not of the other person, but of the love itself. But there is grace in this tension. There is mercy in the midst of the struggle. Because love does not demand that you carry a burden beyond what you are able. Love invites you to trust with the outcome, to release the need to control, and to find peace even when the story is unfinished. It is possible to hold hope without being bound by it. It is possible to love without losing yourself. It is possible to care deeply while also setting boundaries that protect your soul. This is the wisdom that comes from walking through the pain of loving someone emotionally distant. You must remember that you are not alone in this journey. Many have walked this path before you, carrying the ache of unreciprocated love, wrestling with the tension between hope and reality, and through it all remains faithful. He sees your pain, He hears your prayers, and He offers a love that never fails, never grows weary, and never disappoints. So when you find yourself caught between holding on and letting go, I urge you to seek God's guidance. Pray for strength to endure, yes, but also for clarity to see when it is time to rest, to step back, to protect your heart. Trust that love for you is a perfect love, one that desires your healing, your wholeness, and your peace above all else. There is no shame in stepping away from a relationship that drains you. There is no failure in recognizing that some love stories do not unfold the way we hope. What matters most is that you remain true to yourself and to the who made you, that you love as He loves, boldly, graciously, wisely, and that you never lose sight of the hope that is found in Him alone. Love is a sacred gift, but it is not a chain to bind you. It is a call to freedom, to live fully, to love deeply, and to trust with every step along the way.